In the ruins of a continent torn apart by war, heroes did not always wear uniforms. Some wore aprons. Some carried bandages instead of bullets. And among the countless faces lost in the chaos, one woman's name became a whisper of hope, spoken quietly in occupied towns, carved secretly into the walls of makeshift hospitals, and remembered by the men she saved. Her name was Elise Dubois, a nurse, a daughter, a fighter who never carried a gun, yet fought a war of her own. It began in the spring of 1942. Northern France was no longer France. The German occupation had turned villages into outposts, hospitals into command posts, and neighbors into spies. Curfews fell like shadows, and fear became a second language everyone understood. Elise worked at the St. Cecile Military Hospital, once a quiet provincial infirmary, now commandeered by the German army. By day, she tended to wounded soldiers, German and French alike. By night, she wrote letters she could never send, to brothers who had vanished on the front, and to a mother who had not written back in months. But one evening, as the sun disappeared behind the shattered spires of Rouen, something changed. A young man, barely 20, was brought in under guard. His uniform was British, his face pale from blood loss. The officer barked orders, tossing his file onto the table. Prisoner of war, shot during escape attempt. Keep him alive. The Gestapo will collect him at dawn. Elise felt her pulse quicken. A prisoner, an Allied soldier. If he survived the night, he would face interrogation, or worse. She looked into his eyes. He was conscious, though barely. He whispered something in English, faint, cracked, almost lost in the hum of diesel engines outside. She leaned closer. "Please," he murmured, "don't let them take me." Those 6 words changed everything. That night, Elise faced a choice. She could obey, save his life for the Gestapo, or disobey and risk her own life to save his. The candle on her desk flickered as she stared at his medical file. Name: James Carter, Royal Air Force, shot down over Dieppe.
Her father had fought in the last war. He had told her once, a nurse's duty is to life, not to sides. She took a deep breath. "Then so be it," she whispered. At midnight, she began to move. The corridors of St. Cecile were silent, lit only by oil lamps. German guards dozed at the main entrance. Elise pushed the gurney slowly, her heart pounding with every creak of its wheels. The British pilot lay covered with a blanket, morphine numbing his pain. His eyes fluttered open once. She hushed him softly. They reached the side door, the service exit near the old supply shed. For weeks, she had studied the patrol schedules, memorized the guards' habits. She knew there would be a 2-minute gap between the outer patrols, and in those 2 minutes, she would attempt the impossible. Elise stepped into the cold night. The air smelled of wet earth and gun oil. The pilot's breathing grew heavier. The moonlight glinted on the barbed wire fence ahead. She pulled out a pair of wire cutters hidden beneath the linen sheets, stolen from a mechanic's kit days earlier. Her hands shook as she cut through the metal, praying the sound wouldn't carry. In the distance, boots crunched on gravel. She froze. A flashlight beam swept across the courtyard. For a moment, it lingered, just meters away. Then it passed. She pushed forward, through the cut wire, into the darkness beyond. By the time the alarm bell rang at dawn, Elise and the pilot were gone. For 3 days they moved through the countryside following the faint directions of farmers and priests who still believed in the old France. Elise disguised him as a patient from a tuberculosis ward, his uniform buried beneath hay in a wagon. The resistance was everywhere, and nowhere. She knew the signs: chalk marks on fences, a red thread tied to a lamppost, the carved V for victory under bridge stones. Through them, Elise found what she needed: food, shelter, forged papers, and whispers of a path to the coast. But every village carried risk. German patrols searched constantly for escapes. The war had consumed everything. Cities burned, fields lay barren, and entire nations were swallowed by fear. In the middle of it all, a single nurse walked through the wreckage of Europe, carrying not a rifle or a flag, but a simple truth: that mercy could still exist in hell. Her name was Elise Dubois. When the Germans marched into France, she had been a nurse at Saint Cecile Military Hospital in Rouen. Before the war, it was a quiet place of white walls and fresh linen, where the smell of antiseptic drifted like a promise of safety. After the occupation, it became something else entirely: a place of whispers, gunfire, and endless lines of wounded soldiers. Every day, Elise dressed the wounds of men he could no longer call her countrymen. German officers in black uniforms filled the corridors, their boots echoing on the tiles. The tricolor flag was gone, replaced by the Iron Cross. Every breath carried the weight of defeat. But beneath that weight, something inside her refused to die. It began one night in the spring of 1942. A British pilot was brought in under heavy guard, bleeding from a bullet wound to his shoulder. His name, she would later learn, was Lieutenant James Carter. He had been shot down near Dieppe, captured by a German patrol, and beaten when he tried to escape. The order from the commandant was clear: keep him alive until the Gestapo arrived in the morning. Elise washed his wounds in silence. He was barely conscious, his lips cracked from thirst. As she bent over him, he opened his eyes and whispered a few broken words in English. "Please, don't let them take me." She understood enough to feel the plea strike something deep inside her. If she followed orders, he would live only long enough to face torture. If she disobeyed, she would be executed for treason. She looked at him for a long time, then at the red cross stitched to her uniform. Her father's voice came back to her, the words he had spoken before the last war had taken him away. "A nurse's duty," he had said, "is to life itself." That night, Elise made her choice. While the guard slept, she filled a syringe with morphine to dull the pilot's pain, then wheeled his stretcher quietly down the corridor. The hospital was dim and silent, the air heavy with the scent of disinfectant and fear. Each turn of the wheels sounded like thunder in her ears. She reached the service door behind the kitchen, opened it, and stepped into the freezing night. The yard beyond was enclosed by a fence of barbed wire. She had studied it for weeks, ever since she'd begun to imagine doing something impossible. From beneath the blanket, she pulled a pair of wire cutters she had hidden days earlier. Her hands trembled as she cut through the metal. Somewhere nearby, a guard coughed. A dog barked. The sound seemed to echo forever. Then, silence again. Elise pushed the stretcher through the gap and into the open field beyond. Her heart hammered as she looked back at the hospital, that cold, bright place where she had saved so many lives and where her own life now hung by a thread. By dawn, she and the wounded pilot were miles away, moving through the wet fields of Normandy with the help of a farmer who still believed in France. That was how it began. For 3 days, they traveled on foot and by wagon, hiding by day and moving at night. The farmer's wife fed them and gave Elise her husband's old coat to disguise herself. In barns and cellars, Elise tended to James's wound, cleaning it with water boiled over a candle flame. When they finally reached the woods near St. Lo, she found others,
quiet men and women who spoke little and trusted even less. They called themselves the Path of Hope, a name that sounded almost foolish in such times. But their courage was real. They smuggled Allied soldiers through a chain of safe houses, across rivers and mountains, to the coast where small fishing boats waited for the right night to sail to England.
Elise joined them that night. She could no longer return to her hospital or her home. The Gestapo had already discovered the escape and begun to search for the nurse who had vanished with a British prisoner. Her name was on their lists now. Posters with her face appeared on walls, the ink smeared by rain. But Elise was no longer just a nurse. She was a shadow among the hunted, carrying hope in the folds of her coat. Through the long months that followed, she learned to move through occupied France like smoke through ruins. She forged medical papers, memorized train schedules, and carried false vaccination certificates that could open any checkpoint. In the pockets of her apron, she hid messages written in code, scraps of maps, even bullets. The people she met along the way never forgot her. To a wounded paratrooper hidden in a hayloft, she was a miracle. To an orphan boy who guided her through the marshes, she was a ghost. To the Germans, she was the angel of the night, a whisper of defiance they could not catch. Each rescue brought new danger. German patrols searched every village. Collaborators betrayed their neighbors for a few coins. And yet Elise continued, because stopping meant surrender. One freezing night, she and two others carried a wounded resistance fighter across a river under the light of flares. The man was unconscious, bleeding from a stomach wound. The current was strong, the water black with ice. When she slipped, the cold cut through her bones, but she didn't let go. On the far bank, she pressed her hands to the man's wound and whispered a prayer. He lived. It was then she realized that her fight was not only against the Germans, but against despair itself. The occupation could crush towns, burn books, silence voices, but it could not touch the human will to save another life. By 1943, the Path of Hope had grown into a network stretching from Paris to the coast. Elise was at its heart, the quiet link connecting doctors, smugglers, and priests. She carried no weapon, yet every man she helped was one less soldier lost, one more voice against the darkness.
The Gestapo began to close in. A traitor betrayed one of the safe houses near Caen, and several members of the network were arrested. Elise escaped only because she had left hours earlier. She hid in a convent for weeks, tending the sick under a false name. The nuns called her Sister Madeleine. They never asked questions, but they knew. Even when the raids grew worse, Elise refused to leave. She knew others depended on her. In the convent cellar, she built a small hospital from scraps, stolen bandages, morphine traded for bread, candles melted into jars. It was there she traded her next patient, an American airman whose plane had crashed outside the village. He was barely alive when they brought him to her. She stitched his wounds with trembling hands, whispering in English to keep him awake. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was her face, pale, calm, resolute. "Where am I?" he asked. "In the hands of someone who won't let you die," she said. For 2 weeks, she nursed him until he could walk. When it was time to move him, she dressed him as a monk and led him through the forest, past checkpoints to the sea. A fisherman took him across the channel. Before he left, he gave her his dog tag and said, "So you'll remember who you saved." She kept it in her pocket until the end of the war. As her legend spread, so did the danger. The Germans doubled the reward for her capture. Spies hunted her in every town. She changed names, faces, uniforms. A nurse one day, a nun the next, a peasant woman walking with a basket of herbs through fields sown with landmines. The occupation made everyone choose a side. Elise had chosen hers long ago. She didn't fight with guns or sabotage. Her rebellion was quieter, to heal in a world obsessed with destruction. By 1944, she had helped more than 100 Allied soldiers escape through the path of hope. Each man carried her courage with him across the water. Some wrote letters after the war, thanking her. Most never learned her real name.
The Gestapo finally caught up to her in the spring, betrayed by a collaborator who had once shared her table. They stormed the farmhouse where she was hiding, seizing her before she could burn her papers. They said she stood straight when they questioned her. She told them nothing. Not one name, not one address. For 3 days, they interrogated her. She spoke only 7 words. I am a nurse. I save lives. That's all. When they led her into the courtyard at dawn, the sky was pale and cold. She looked at the men with rifles and felt no fear. Her hands were steady. There will be others, she said softly. You cannot stop mercy. The shots echoed across the village. After liberation, when the villagers returned, they found her buried under an apple tree behind the convent. In her coat pocket, they discovered a small notebook written in invisible ink. Only one line was visible. For every life saved, a light remains. Her story spread across France, then across the world. The pilots she had saved told her tale to anyone who would listen. They called her the Angel of the Night, the nurse who smuggled soldiers to safety behind enemy lines. And though her body lay beneath the soil of a country broken by war, her name lived on, whispered in hospitals, in homes, and in the hearts of all who believed that even in the darkest of times, compassion is the bravest act of all. The rain came down in heavy sheets as Elise trudged through the muddy path, her breath clouding in the cold air. Every step felt heavier than the last. The sound of distant thunder mixed with the faint hum of engines. Somewhere out there, German patrols moved through the countryside, hunting for anyone who dared defy them. Elise pulled her cloak tighter, guiding the wounded pilot through the darkness. He stumbled, pain etched across his face, but she held him up. They couldn't stop now. Not when safety was still miles away. At last, the faint outline of an old barn appeared through the mist. She pushed open the door, guiding him inside. The smell of hay and damp earth filled the air. She eased him onto a bed of straw and tore open her satchel. Her hands trembled as she cleaned his wound by the dim light of a single lantern. The man, an Allied pilot named James, watched her silently. He tried to thank her, but she shook her head, whispering for him to stay quiet. Outside, boots crunched against gravel. She froze. The sound passed. For now, they were safe. She leaned back, breathing hard. The silence was broken by a soft knock. 2 short taps, then 1 long. Elise's heart jumped. That was the code. She crossed the barn, lifted the latch, and opened the door just enough to see a man standing in the rain. He was drenched, his face hidden by the shadow of his hat. "Madame Dubois?" he whispered. She nodded. The man gave a small, knowing smile. "I'm René, from the Path of Hope. You've been expected." They followed him through the forest under the cover of night, the pilot supported between them. The path was narrow, twisting through gnarled trees and thickets that clawed at their clothes. When they finally reached a clearing, a small farmhouse appeared, dark except for the faint flicker of candlelight in a window. Inside, the air was thick with tension and purpose. Around a wooden table sat men and women studying maps, scribbling on scraps of paper, tuning small radios. They looked up as Elise entered, and a woman with sharp eyes and gray-streaked hair approached. René nodded toward her. "Claire Beaumont," he said softly. "She runs this sector." Claire looked Elise up and down.
So you're the nurse who walked out of a German hospital with a British pilot? Elise didn't answer at first, only bowed her head slightly. I did what I had to. Claire studied her for a long moment, then gave a faint smile. Good. We need people like you. That night, Elise sat among them, listening as they spoke in low voices. Maps spread across the table revealed an intricate network stretching across France, a hidden web of routes, safe houses, and code names. It was the chemin d'espoir, the path of hope, a lifeline for those trapped behind enemy lines. They smuggled soldiers, agents, and intelligence through forests, rivers, and ruined towns, risking everything for freedom. But the risks were immense. Every week, someone vanished, arrested, tortured, executed. Still, they continued, because to stop was to surrender.
When Claire spoke again, her voice carried both strength and fatigue. "You're a nurse," she said. "You can move freely. The Germans trust nurses. They'll let you pass without question. That's something we don't have." Elise understood immediately. Her role was clear. She would no longer just treat the wounded. She would carry lives, hidden under her very uniform, across enemy lines. Her first mission came just days later. A resistance fighter named Henri had been shot while sabotaging a German train. The infection in his leg was spreading fast. The Gestapo was searching house to house. Elise disguised herself in a Red Cross uniform, strapped a medical satchel over her shoulder, and walked straight into the occupied village. Her forged papers trembled slightly in her hand as she approached the checkpoint. The soldier glanced at them, then at her. "Medical duty?" he asked. She nodded calmly. "Yes, typhus outbreak." He waved her through. In a dim cellar beneath a bakery, Elise found Henri lying pale and delirious, his breaths shallow. She worked quickly, cleaning the wound, whispering to keep him awake. When she finished, she turned to the baker, a nervous woman, wringing her hands. "Tonight," Elise said quietly, "we move him." At dusk, they lifted Henri onto a cart, covered him with sacks of flour, and pushed through the narrow alleyways. German soldiers loomed on every corner. Once, they froze as a patrol passed by, dogs barking. Elise's heart thudded in her chest, but she didn't move. When the soldiers turned away, she exhaled and kept going. At the edge of town, a truck waited with its headlights off. Renee was behind the wheel. Elise climbed aboard, holding Henri's hand as they drove into the blackness. The rain fell harder now, masking the sound of the engine. She looked back at the village disappearing into the mist and felt something shift inside her. This was the beginning of something much larger than herself. Days turned to weeks, weeks into months. Elise learned to forge papers, memorize coded messages, and hide secrets in plain sight. Her satchel became her weapon, a kit filled with bandages concealing microfilm, medicine bottles hiding encrypted notes. She crossed checkpoints, treated the wounded, and carried hope wherever she went. But the danger grew. The Germans began to notice a pattern: missing soldiers, escaped prisoners, and a mysterious nurse who appeared in every report. Her name spread through whispers: l'ange de la nuit, the angel of the night. Some said she didn't exist. Others swore they had seen her pass through villages moments before the Germans arrived.
By early 1943, the Gestapo had given her another name, Der Schattenengel, the Shadow Angel. Wanted posters appeared in towns across Normandy. Still, Elise pressed on. When one route was closed, she found another. When one safe house was burned, she built a new one. The resistance depended on her now. Every operation, every smuggled soldier bore her quiet touch. And yet, deep down, she knew the net was tightening. One winter night, she received her most dangerous mission yet: to escort 3 downed Allied pilots from the outskirts of Paris to the coast. 200 kilometers through enemy territory. The plan was bold, almost impossible, but she didn't hesitate. She burned the orders after reading them, packed her kit, and left before dawn. Paris was a city under siege, filled with uniforms and fear. Elise moved through the crowd with her head down, her Red Cross armband clearly visible. The 3 pilots followed close behind, disguised as railway workers. At the station, soldiers patrolled the platforms, rifles slung casually over their shoulders. Elise's pulse pounded in her ears. When the inspector approached, she smiled and handed over her papers. "Traveling for medical duty," she said smoothly. The man frowned, flipping through them. "Where to?" "Ruin. Typhus outbreak." He hesitated, then stamped them and waved her on. "You'd better hurry. Inspections tonight." She thanked him and moved forward without looking back. Inside the freight car, the smell of oil and wood mixed with cold night air. The train jolted to life, and Elise sat by the door, her heart racing with each turn of the wheels. The men beside her drifted into an easy sleep, their faces hidden beneath rough coats. She stared out through the slats of the wooden wall, watching the moon slide across the sky. In that silence, she thought of everything she had left behind, the hospital halls filled with echoing boots, the patients she could no longer tend, the life she had once known. That world was gone. Now there was only this, the mission, the road, and the fragile thread of hope binding them all together.
Hours passed. When the train finally slowed, Elise's eyes snapped open. The station ahead was crawling with soldiers. Searchlights swept the cars. She turned to the men. "Don't move," she whispered, "no matter what happens." The door slid open, flooding the car with white light. A German officer barked orders. Soldiers climbed aboard, checking crates and papers. Elise kept her eyes down. When they reached her, she lifted her head calmly. "Red Cross," she said, offering her documents. The officer grunted, glanced briefly, and waved them off. "Keep moving," he ordered. The light moved on. The door slammed shut. Only then did she allow herself to breathe again. The train carried them west through the night, away from the heart of occupied France. Outside, the forests rolled past like waves of darkness. Inside, Elise sat in silence, clutching the cross around her neck. Each mile felt like a miracle. She didn't know if they would make it to the coast. She only knew that she had to try, because stopping meant death, for her, for them, for everything she had built. Somewhere across the channel, in London, Allied intelligence began picking up whispers of a French nurse smuggling soldiers through occupied territory. They didn't know her name or her face, but they knew her work. They called her the Angel of the Night, and they began to send more men her way. Coded messages, encrypted coordinates, and desperate pleas for help. Her legend was growing, but so was the danger. The Gestapo was closing in. And soon, Elise would be forced to make an impossible choice, one that would test the limits of her courage, her loyalty, and her heart. Because the next rescue would not be just another mission, it would be personal.
Winter tightened its grip on France. The wind carried the scent of smoke and iron, and every whisper seemed to echo with fear. Elise moved through the countryside with practiced calm, her white nurse's coat now worn thin, her forged papers tucked beneath her dress. She had crossed borders, outsmarted patrols, and carried more souls to freedom than she could count. Yet every victory brought her closer to the edge. The Gestapo's noose was tightening, and somewhere in their dark offices, her name was being spoken with venom. By the start of 1943, Elise's network had grown into one of the largest underground escape routes in northern France. Dozens of safe houses stretched from Paris to the coast, each one connected through coded letters, radio bursts, and whispered passwords. The path of hope was alive. Soldiers who had fallen from the skies now found their way home through the hands of a nurse who refused to surrender. But with growth came danger. The Gestapo had infiltrated smaller networks before. Elise knew it was only a matter of time before someone betrayed them. Still, she pressed on. Every night she walked between worlds, the quiet, watchful world of the occupiers and the trembling, defiant heartbeat of the resistance. Sometimes, when the fear became too heavy, she would remind herself of the first man she saved, the pilot, James. His smile before he left for England, his words still haunted her. "You're fighting your own war, Elise. Don't ever stop." Then came the night that would change everything. It was just after midnight when a coded knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find a young boy, no older than 16, shivering in the cold. "Madame Dubois," he whispered. "They've taken Renée." The words hit her like a gunshot. Renée, her guide, her partner, her friend had been arrested in a raid outside Caen. The Gestapo had surrounded the farmhouse before dawn. No one knew if he had talked. No one knew if he was still alive. Elise closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the truth settle in her chest. The network was compromised.
By morning, her safe houses were already being searched. Radio operators went silent. Couriers vanished. Still, she refused to abandon her mission. "If we stop now," she told Claire, "everyone we helped will die for nothing." Claire nodded grimly. "Then we move faster. We move smarter." That night, they burned every document, every map, every trace of their names. The path of hope would live on in memory alone. The following week, Elise was tasked with smuggling an American airman named Captain Harris to the coast. He had been shot down near Chartres and carried valuable intelligence, information that could help the Allies prepare for their next offensive. Losing him wasn't an option. The plan was simple: travel as nurse and patient to a monastery in Brittany, where a fishing boat would take them to England, but between them and the coast lay hundreds of miles of danger. Elise dressed the captain's wound, bandaged his head, and handed him a forged hospital pass. "From this moment on," she said quietly, "you are my brother. We are going home." The train station was crowded with soldiers, their helmets glinting in the pale light. Elise walked with slow, deliberate confidence, her papers ready. The guard glanced at them and waved her through. The first checkpoint fell behind them. The second followed. Each time her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. When they reached Rennes, Elise led Harris into an abandoned chapel where a contact was supposed to meet them. But something felt wrong. The door was ajar. Inside, candles burned low, and the air smelled of damp stone. She called softly, but no one answered. Then came the sound. Boots against the floor, deliberate and close. Elise froze. From the shadows stepped a man in a black coat. His face was familiar. Too familiar. It was Father Marcel, the village priest who had once given her shelter. But his eyes were different now, cold, empty. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly. "They're watching." Elisa's throat tightened. "Who's watching?" she whispered. "Everyone," he said, and stepped aside. Behind him the door burst open. German soldiers flooded the chapel, shouting orders, rifles raised. Harris reached for his gun, but Elise grabbed his hand. "No," she hissed. "Run."
The two of them sprinted through the side door as bullets shattered the wooden pews. They ran through the graveyard, through rows of stone crosses glistening in the rain. A bullet grazed Elisa's shoulder, but she didn't stop. They reached the forest and threw themselves behind a fallen log. Her breath came in ragged gasps. "You're bleeding," Harris said. She shook her head. "Keep moving." For hours, they stumbled through the woods, until finally the forest opened onto a cliff overlooking the sea. Below, the waves crashed against the rocks. Somewhere, the morning mist hung thick over the French countryside as Elise stepped off the train, her boots sinking into the damp earth. The three pilots followed her quietly, exhaustion and fear etched into their faces. They were alive, but the journey was far from over. Ahead lay dozens of checkpoints, patrols, and the ever-watchful eyes of the Gestapo. Elise adjusted her satchel, scanning the horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills was the coast, freedom, if they could reach it. For now, they needed shelter. She led them to a remote farmhouse she had used months before, but as she approached, a sense of unease crept through her chest. The air was too still. The shutters, once slightly ajar, were sealed shut. A single chicken clucked nervously near the gate, but there were no signs of life inside. Elise's hand tightened around her bag. Something wasn't right. She motioned for the men to stay back and crept to the door. She knocked softly. Once, twice, once again. The coded rhythm of the path of hope. No answer. She turned the handle. The door opened with a faint creak. Inside, everything was as she remembered, except for the silence. The floorboards groaned under her feet as she moved through the small kitchen, and then she saw it. A blood stain on the floor, dark and dry. Her breath caught in her throat.
The farmhouse had been compromised. She hurried back outside. "We move," she whispered sharply. "Now!" The pilots didn't ask questions. They followed her into the woods, branches snapping underfoot as they ran. Behind them, far off in the distance, came the sound of an engine. Then another. Elise didn't look back. She knew what it meant. The Gestapo was close. They ran until the forest swallowed them whole. Hours later, as dusk settled, they reached an abandoned chapel on the edge of a ruined village. Inside, dust hung in the air like fog. Elise set the men down near the altar and drew in a deep breath. Her hands shook as she unrolled a faded map. The route to the coast had just grown more dangerous. The usual safe houses had gone dark. Something was wrong across the entire network. Renee's last message echoed in her mind. "There's a traitor among us." She had wanted to dismiss it then, but now, seeing the blood in that farmhouse, she couldn't. Someone had betrayed them. For days they stayed hidden in the chapel, surviving on whatever scraps Elise could find. Every night, she sent coded messages through the small radio hidden in her medical kit. No one responded. The silence was worse than any gunfire. On the fourth night, a faint signal finally broke through. A single voice, distorted and urgent. "Elise, it's Claire. You're not safe. They know about the pilots. Leave now. Head north." Then static. Elise's pulse quickened.
Under cover of darkness, they made their way north, traveling through forests and abandoned fields. Each night they walked. Each dawn they hid. Elise guided them with unerring precision, avoiding roads, avoiding light, trusting only the instincts she had honed through months of danger. One evening, as they crossed a quiet meadow, the youngest of the pilots, a boy no older than 20, spoke softly. "Why do you do this?" he asked. "You could be free. You could be safe." Elise didn't answer right away. She looked up at the stars, their faint light glimmering through the smoke of distant war. "Because," she said finally, "I couldn't live with myself if I did nothing." He said nothing more, and in the silence that followed, her words hung heavy in the air, a truth born not from heroism, but from necessity. When they finally reached the northern coast, the salty wind carried a promise of hope. They were within reach of freedom. The final step was to contact the fishing boats that ferried escapees to England under the cover of fog. But as Elise approached the small village near the cliffs, she noticed German soldiers patrolling the streets. There were too many, more than usual. Her stomach turned. They had been expected. She pulled the pilots into the shadows of a stone wall. From there, she could see it clearly. The pier was crawling with soldiers. Searchlights cut through the mist. Somewhere, the traitor had told them everything. Elise's mind raced. The escape was impossible now, but she couldn't give up. She had to find another way.
She led the men inland again through narrow back roads until they reached an old convent. The sisters there had once helped smuggle orphans out of the city. Elise knocked on the heavy wooden door. After a moment, it opened just enough for an elderly nun to peer out. Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Elise," she whispered, "we heard you were dead." "Not yet," Elise replied, "but I need help." The nun opened the door wider. Inside, the convent was dark and quiet. Candles flickered along the hallway, casting long shadows across the worn stone floor. Elise explained the situation quickly. The nun listened, then nodded. "We'll hide them, but you must leave before dawn. The soldiers search here often." Elise wanted to argue, but she saw the truth in the woman's eyes. She was being hunted. Staying would endanger them all. That night, as she prepared to leave, one of the pilots, James, the same man she had saved from the hospital months before, caught her hand. "You've done enough," he said quietly. "If you go on like this, they'll catch you." She met his gaze, her eyes tired but unflinching. "Then let them try." And with that, she disappeared back into the night. For the next several weeks, Elise lived like a phantom, moving from town to town, changing her name, altering her appearance. But no disguise could hide her forever. Posters bearing her face appeared across northern France. The Gestapo offered a reward for her capture. They called her the most dangerous woman in Normandy. Still, she kept working. The network was broken, but not destroyed. With the help of a few surviving members, she began rebuilding it smaller, tighter, more secretive. Each rescue was harder now, each risk greater. But she refused to stop. Every man she saved, every child she smuggled, was a small victory against the darkness.
Yet the walls were closing in. One evening, as she returned to a safe house near Rouen, she found the door ajar. Her heart pounded. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of smoke. The place had been searched, overturned furniture, paper scattered, drawers ripped open. She heard a faint sound, someone breathing. She followed it to the back room and froze. René was there, slumped against the wall, blood staining his shirt. His eyes fluttered open as she knelt beside him. "They found me. Claire," she tried to warn us. His hand trembled as he pressed a folded piece of paper into hers. "There's a list. Names of everyone left. Hide it. Don't let them..." His voice broke, and then he was gone. Elise sat there in silence, staring at the paper in her hand. Her friend, her ally, was dead. She felt the weight of the war settle deeper on her shoulders. Slowly, she rose. There was no time for grief, not yet. She took the list, hid it inside the lining of her medical kit, and left before the soldiers returned. Outside, the night was cold and silent. For the first time, she felt truly alone. But as she walked through the darkened streets, she whispered to herself over and over, like a prayer. For them, for all of them. She would finish what they had started, no matter the cost. The winter of 1943 was the coldest Elise could remember. The roads were frozen sheets of silence, the trees bare skeletons reaching into a pale, lifeless sky. The world had shrunk to the sound of her own breath and the crunch of frost beneath her boots. Every village she passed through carried the same signs: boarded windows, ration lines, the stench of fear. The Germans were everywhere.
She had become a ghost, the shadow angel. Each day she changed her name, her uniform, her story. Sometimes she was Sister Margot, a nun carrying medicine to the sick. Sometimes she was a midwife tending to expectant mothers. Sometimes she was simply no one at all. Her reflection in cracked mirrors no longer looked like the woman she had once been, yet the fire in her heart burned as fiercely as ever. The resistance was fractured, but not dead. Small cells still operated across the countryside, bound together by loyalty and whispers. Through them, Elise continued her mission, moving soldiers, children, and couriers across the occupied zone. Every successful escape was another victory in a war that was being fought not only with guns, but with courage. But the Gestapo was adapting. Reports began to spread of a new commander sent to hunt her down, a man named Friedrich Keller. Cold, methodical, and ruthless. He studied her every move, every pattern, every rumor. The nurse, he called her in his reports. She hides in plain sight. She saves them not for glory, but out of defiance. To him, she was a personal challenge, a puzzle that had to be solved. By spring, he was closing in. One morning, as Elise crossed the Seine disguised as a field medic, she noticed soldiers stationed along the riverbanks, inspecting every cart, every traveler. Her forged papers had never failed her before, but something in the air felt different. When she reached the checkpoint, the officer's eyes lingered on her longer than usual. He studied her face, her uniform, her satchel. "Where are you headed, nurse?" "To Vernon. There's a fever outbreak." He nodded slowly. "You travel alone?"
Yes. He took her papers, examined them, then gave a short, cold smile. "Be careful," he said. "They say the roads aren't safe. There's a woman out there, a nurse, a traitor." Her heart nearly stopped. She managed a polite nod and crossed the bridge, her pulse thundering in her ears. He didn't know. Not yet. But they were closer than ever. That night, she reached another safe house, a crumbling cottage deep in the woods. Inside waited Claire Beaumont, her face drawn with exhaustion. They hadn't seen each other in months. When Elise stepped through the door, Claire's eyes softened with relief. "You're alive," she breathed. "Barely," Elise replied. "The network is collapsing. Renee is gone. Keller's hunting us." Claire nodded grimly. "I know. But there's something else. The Allies are planning something big. A landing, maybe in months. If we can hold the line, if we can keep the escape routes open until then, it could change everything." Elise's gaze hardened. "Then we hold." For weeks they worked together, rebuilding what they could. New codes, new couriers, new paths through the forests. The risk was unbearable. Each message could be their last. Each face could be a spy. Then one night, as Elise prepared to leave for another rescue, Claire stopped her. "There's something you need to know," she said quietly. "Someone betrayed us before. The raid at the farmhouse, the one that killed Renee. It wasn't the Gestapo who found us by luck. It was someone inside." Elise froze. "Who?" Claire hesitated. "We don't know, but Keller does. He's using them. That's how he's tracking you."
The words hit Elise like a knife. She had always known the danger came from outside. Now she realized it might be beside her. She left that night with the weight of doubt heavy in her chest. The journey ahead took her through rain-soaked valleys and fields littered with the remnants of war. Broken trucks, burned homes, forgotten graves. She moved like a shadow, always one step ahead of the soldiers who hunted her. But even shadows can be caught. A week later, while hiding in a barn outside Évreux, Elise heard the unmistakable rumble of engines. Trucks. She peered through a crack in the wooden wall. Soldiers were surrounding the building. Someone had betrayed her. Again. She turned to the young courier beside her, barely 17. "Go," she whispered, "through the back. Don't stop." "What about you?" he asked, panic in his eyes. "I'll keep them busy." Before he could argue, she pushed him toward the rear door. Then she grabbed her satchel and ran toward the front, bursting into the courtyard just as the Germans entered. A shout rang out. Gunfire exploded through the air. Elise darted between carts and fences, bullets tearing through the night. She sprinted toward the woods, her lungs burning, her legs trembling. A sharp pain seared through her side, a bullet grazing her ribs. She fell, gasping, clutching the wound, but she didn't stop. Crawling through the underbrush, she forced herself onward until the sounds of pursuit faded. When dawn came, she was miles away, bleeding, exhausted, but alive. She found refuge in an abandoned chapel, collapsing beneath the altar. The wound wasn't deep, but she knew infection could kill her if she didn't treat it soon. With trembling hands, she cleaned it as best she could, whispering a prayer through gritted teeth. Days passed. Fever set in. The line between dream and reality blurred. She saw faces, Renee's, Claire's, James's, flickering like ghosts in the candlelight. She wondered if she had done enough, if saving a few lives could ever matter in a world tearing itself apart.
On the fourth day, footsteps echoed in the chapel. She reached for her knife, but a familiar voice broke the silence. "Elise." It was James, the pilot she had saved long ago. His hair was longer now, his face hardened by war. "We've been looking for you," he said softly. "London knows what you did. They call you the Angel of the Night." Elise tried to smile, but tears welled in her eyes. "An angel?" she whispered. "I'm no angel, James. Just a nurse who couldn't stop caring." He knelt beside her, taking her hand. "You've done more than anyone, but it's not over. We need you one last time." She looked at him, weak but determined. "Tell me what to do." He unfolded a small map. "There's a convoy of Allied prisoners being transported through Normandy next week. If we can get them out, they'll join the resistance. But we need someone inside, someone the Germans won't suspect." She understood immediately. "A nurse." He nodded. "It's suicide." Her lips curved into a faint smile. So was everything else. That night, as she prepared for what she knew might be her final mission, Elise wrote a letter, short, simple, and unaddressed. "If this is the end, let them remember that we fought not for glory, but for mercy. That even in the darkest nights, a single act of kindness can defy an empire." She folded the letter, tucked it into her satchel, and walked into the dawn. Night after night, the forest whispered secrets only a few dared to hear. For Elise, each shadow carried both danger and hope, the twin forces that had ruled her life since the war began. The path ahead was slick with rain, the mud clinging to her boots, slowing her down. She had walked this route so many times, it was etched into her mind. Every fallen branch, every hidden root, every stone that could twist an ankle. And tonight, she wasn't alone. Behind her, 2 soldiers stumbled through the darkness. They were little more than boys, no older than 20. Their uniforms were torn,
their eyes hollow from hunger and exhaustion. One leaned heavily on the other, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage wrapped around his thigh.
"Just a bit farther," Elise whispered, glancing over her shoulder. Her voice was steady, the kind of calm that could only be learned by defying fear too many times. The wounded soldier nodded, gritting his teeth. Every step was agony, but in her presence even pain seemed secondary. The forest was alive with sounds, the distant growl of engines, the hum of enemy patrols combing the countryside. They were close, too close. Elise motioned for silence. The trio crouched behind a fallen tree trunk as the faint glow of headlights cut through the mist. A German truck rumbled along the dirt road below. Soldiers laughed inside, the sound of clinking metal and cigarettes breaking the quiet of the night. Elise's heart pounded, but her face remained still. She reached out, pressing a finger to her lips. Her eyes locked on the soldiers beside her. Every second stretched into eternity. Then the truck passed. The sound faded into the distance. Only when the forest returned to silence did she exhale. "Let's move," she whispered. "We're nearly there." They reached the base of a hill where a small stream trickled through moss-covered stones. Beneath the sound of water, Elise knelt, brushing away leaves and dirt. Her fingers found what she was looking for, a metal latch buried in the earth.
With a grunt, she pulled it open, revealing a hidden hatch. The soldiers stared wide-eyed. "In here," she said softly. "Quickly." The passage led underground, a narrow tunnel carved beneath an abandoned farmhouse. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of earth and old wood. Candles flickered against the walls, revealing crates, cots, and a small table littered with medical supplies. It wasn't much, but to those fleeing death, it was sanctuary. As soon as they were safe inside, Elise closed the hatch and sealed it tight. Then she turned, her tone shifting from guide to nurse. "Sit," she ordered gently. "Let me see that wound." The injured soldier sank onto the cot, his face pale. Elise moved quickly, sterilizing instruments, cutting away the blood-soaked cloth, stitching the torn flesh with precision born of endless practice. He winced, but didn't cry out. Instead, he stared at her, this young woman risking her life for men she'd only just met. "You're not afraid, are you?" he asked through clenched teeth. Elise paused. For a moment, the question hung between them. "Every day," she whispered. "But fear means you still have something to lose, and I'm not ready to lose hope." She tied the final stitch, wiped the blood from her hands, and offered a faint smile. "You'll live. Rest now. You're safe here. For tonight." Hours later, when the soldiers slept, Elise sat alone at the small table, her eyes fixed on a worn photograph. It showed a young man in uniform, smiling, full of life. With a grunt, she pulled it open, revealing a hidden hatch. The soldiers stared wide-eyed. "In here," she said softly. "Quickly." The passage led underground, a narrow tunnel carved beneath an abandoned farmhouse. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of earth and old wood. Candles flickered against the walls, revealing crates, cots, and a small table littered with medical supplies. It wasn't much, but to those fleeing death, it was sanctuary. As soon as they were safe inside, Elise closed the hatch and sealed it tight. Then she turned, her tone shifting from guide to nurse. "Sit," she ordered gently. "Let me see that wound." The injured soldier sank onto the cot, his face pale. Elise moved quickly, sterilizing instruments, cutting away the blood-soaked cloth,
stitching the torn flesh with precision born of endless practice. He winced, but didn't cry out. Instead, he stared at her, this young woman risking her life for men she'd only just met. "You're not afraid, are you?" he asked through clenched teeth. Elise paused. For a moment, the question hung between them. "Every day," she whispered. "But fear means you still have something to lose, and I'm not ready to lose hope." She tied the final stitch, wiped the blood from her hands, and offered a faint smile. "You'll live. Rest now. You're safe here. For tonight." Hours later, when the soldiers slept, Elise sat alone at the small table, her eyes fixed on a worn photograph. It showed a young man in uniform, smiling, full of life.
Her brother, Jakob. He had been taken 3 years ago during the first invasion. No one ever found his body. But every soldier she saved, every man she pulled back from death's edge, in her heart, it was as if she was saving him again and again. The resistance had given her many names. To some, she was the night nurse. To others, the angel of Ardens. But to the enemy, she was a ghost, a rumor whispered in barracks, a shadow that stole prisoners from under their noses. And tonight, she was planning something bigger than she had ever attempted before. At dawn, Elise climbed out of the tunnel and made her way toward the village. She wore the crisp uniform of a German Red Cross nurse, stolen months ago from a supply depot. The disguise had saved her more than once. She walked through the narrow streets, past shops with boarded windows and posters screaming propaganda. The air smelled of smoke and fear. A patrol waved her through without question. Her papers, expertly forged, marked her as Elise Koch, field nurse, attached to Wehrmacht Medical Division. She passed them with a polite nod, her heart beating calmly despite the risk. Every step, every smile was calculated. She had learned to wear her mask perfectly. At the town square, she approached the old bakery. It looked abandoned, but when she knocked 3 times in a specific rhythm, a slit opened in the door. "Password?" A man's voice whispered. "Solstice," she replied. The door opened just enough for her to slip inside. Within the dim room stood 2 resistance operatives, a middle-aged man with a scar across his cheek, and a young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Elise," the man said, relief flooding his face. "We thought you were caught." "Not yet," she said, setting her medical bag on the table. "But I have 2 more, both Allied pilots. They need transport across the border before the week ends." The woman cursed softly. "The patrols have doubled. The Gestapo is raiding farmhouses at night." "I know," Elise replied, pulling a map from her bag. "That's why we'll use the river route. There's an old mill upstream, the one near St. Laurent. We'll hide them in the grain carts and move before dawn." The man nodded grimly. "You're taking a hell of a risk." "I've been taking risks since the day this war began. And so have you. We either save them or we watch them die." Silence followed, the kind that carries the weight of truth. At the town square, she approached the old bakery. It looked abandoned, but when she knocked 3 times in a specific rhythm, a slit opened in the door. "Password?" A man's voice whispered. "Solstice," she replied. The door opened just enough for her to slip inside. Within the dim room stood 2 resistance operatives, a middle-aged man with a scar across his cheek, and a young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Elise," the man said, relief flooding his face. "We thought you were caught." "Not yet," she said, setting her medical bag on the table. "But I have 2 more, both Allied pilots.
They need transport across the border before the week ends. The woman cursed softly. The patrols have doubled. The Gestapo is raiding farmhouses at night. I know, Elise replied, pulling a map from her bag. That's why we'll use the river route. There's an old mill upstream, the one near St. Laurent. We'll hide them in the grain carts and move before dawn. The man nodded grimly. You're taking a hell of a risk. I've been taking risks since the day this war began. And so have you. We either save them or we watch them die. Silence followed, the kind that carries the weight of truth.
Finally, the man spoke. Then it's decided we move tomorrow night. That evening, Elise returned to her hidden refuge. The two soldiers were awake now, sitting at the table, whispering about their families, their homes, the lives they'd left behind. When she entered, they fell silent, as if sensing the gravity in her eyes. She told them of the plan, the river, the mill, the route that would lead them to safety. One of them, the younger, looked terrified. And if they catch us, he asked. Elise met his gaze. Then I'll make sure they never find you alive, she said softly. But they won't catch us, I promise. There was something in her tone, not bravado, but conviction, the kind of certainty born from surviving the impossible too many times. That night, as rain began to fall again, Elise prepared her supplies: bandages, morphine, forged papers, and a small revolver hidden in the lining of her coat. Every movement was deliberate. Every breath carried the weight of countless souls she'd already helped escape. When she finally blew out the last candle, the darkness closed in, familiar, almost comforting.
Tomorrow would decide everything, whether her legend would live or die with her in the shadows of enemy lines. The rain had not stopped for 2 days. It fell in steady sheets that turned the earth to sludge and the rivers into black, swirling veins cutting through the countryside. Elise stood at the window of the farmhouse, her breath fogging the glass. In the distance, she could see faint lights moving through the mist, patrols sweeping the valley, searching for ghosts. Behind her, the two soldiers gathered what little they had: dry bread, a canteen, and the courage to walk into darkness once again. "Are you sure about this?" one asked, voice low. Elise turned, fastening the clasp on her coat. "If we wait, they'll find this place. The river is our only chance." She moved to the small table, checking the revolver hidden in her satchel, the forged documents folded neatly beside it. Then she looked at the men, weary, afraid, but alive. "Listen carefully," she said. "Once we reach the mill, we move fast. No talking, no light. You stay close and you follow my lead. Understand?" They nodded. "Good. Then let's go." The night swallowed them whole. Their footsteps made no sound on the wet earth, only the whisper of rain and the soft rustle of leaves as they moved. Every few minutes, Elise would stop, raise her hand, and listen. The far-off rumble of engines, the bark of a dog, the sound of boots crunching gravel. The Germans were out tonight. Somewhere in the distance, a flare lit up the sky, white light tearing across the clouds like a wound.
She whispered, "Down." They dropped into the mud just as a convoy of trucks passed along the ridge above. The engines roared, headlights slicing through the darkness. Elise pressed her face into the earth, heart pounding. She could smell the oil, the smoke, the stench of war. Then, silence again. She lifted her head slowly, her face streaked with rain and dirt. "Move," she breathed. "We're running out of time." By midnight, they reached the river. It was swollen from the rain, the current fast and unforgiving. Across the water, the outline of the old grain mill stood like a ghost, half collapsed, its roof sagging, windows boarded. "This is it," Elise whispered. They crouched among the reeds, the roar of the river masking their voices. "The others are waiting inside. We'll cross here, one at a time. The water's cold, but shallow enough if you keep left." One soldier hesitated. "And if we're seen?" Elise gave a faint smile. "Then pray the river is kinder than the men who follow us." Without another word, she stepped into the water. It bit at her legs, icy and relentless, but she pressed forward. Her breath came in sharp gasps, her heart pounding as the current tugged at her coat. Behind her, the soldiers followed, clutching their gear above their heads. Halfway across, a sound cut through the night, sharp, mechanical. The beam of a flashlight swept across the far bank. Elise froze. "Voices! German! Close! Patrol! Down!"
They dropped beneath the surface, just as the light passed overhead. The icy water closed over them, muffling the shouts and the splashing of boots on the bank. Elise's lungs burned. She stayed under until her vision began to blur, then rose silently, just enough to breathe. The patrol's voices faded. The light moved on. She motioned for the others to follow. They stumbled onto the far shore, soaked and shivering, but alive. The mill loomed before them, dark and silent. Elise knocked twice on the wooden door, then paused, one long, two short. After a tense moment, it creaked open. A bearded man in a tattered coat held a lantern, his eyes narrowing before softening with recognition. "Elise," he whispered, "you made it." "Barely," she said. "They're tightening patrols. We'll have to leave before dawn." The man nodded, motioning them inside. The interior smelled of damp grain and oil. Shadows danced along the walls as the lantern flickered. 3 other refugees huddled near the corner, 2 pilots and a wounded partisan, his arm in a sling. When they saw Elise, hope lit their faces. "Are we really crossing tonight?" one asked. "Yes," she replied firmly. "The carts are ready. We follow the trade route north. If all goes well, you'll be across the border by morning."
Elise worked silently, binding wounds, wrapping bread, marking the escape path on her map. Every movement was mechanical, practiced. But inside, she felt the weight of every life resting on her shoulders. When the time came, she looked at them all, faces pale in the lantern light, eyes filled with both fear and trust. "This is it," she said softly. "No noise, no hesitation. Once we start, there's no turning back." They nodded. She extinguished the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. The creak of wood, the soft roll of cartwheels on mud, these were the only sounds as they began to move. Outside, the storm had eased, leaving behind a thick fog that blanketed the fields. Perfect cover, or perfect trap. The cart crept forward, pulled by a single horse. Elise walked beside it, hand on the reins, her eyes scanning the horizon. In the distance, a faint glow marked the checkpoint, the final obstacle before freedom. She whispered to the man hidden in the cart, "Stay still. Whatever happens, don't move." He didn't answer. Only the sound of breathing came from within. As they neared the checkpoint, 2 German sentries stepped from the shadows, rifles slung across their shoulders. "Halt!" one barked. Elise froze, forcing calm into her voice. "Medic transport from the western sector, delivering grain and medical supplies to St. Vincent."
The soldier squinted, taking the papers. "At this hour?" She smiled faintly. "Orders are orders. Wounded don't wait for sunrise." The man chuckled, shaking his head. He leaned toward her, his breath heavy with tobacco. "You're brave to travel alone, Fräulein." "War doesn't leave much room for fear," she replied, meeting his gaze evenly. He hesitated, then handed back the papers.
Move along. She nodded once, her heart hammering as she guided the cart forward. They passed through the gate. She dared not breathe until the glow of the checkpoint faded behind them. Then finally she exhaled, a trembling sigh of relief. They were through. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe they might actually make it. But fate, as always, had other plans. A gunshot tore through the night. The horse reared, screaming. Elise dropped to the ground as bullets ripped through the fog. "Ambush!" someone shouted. German voices echoed. The checkpoint guards had realized too late who she really was. "Elise! One of the soldiers yelled from the cart! They're behind us!"
"Run," she screamed. "Get to the tree line." She fired her revolver into the mist. 1, 2, 3 shots, then turned and pushed the wounded man from the cart, dragging him toward cover. The world became chaos. Shouts, gunfire, the smell of smoke and mud. But Elise didn't stop. She pulled, crawled, stumbled through the darkness, her lungs burning, her hands slick with blood that wasn't entirely someone else's. Finally, they reached the woods. She collapsed behind a fallen tree, gasping. The others gathered around her, alive, shaken, wide-eyed. "Is everyone here?" she rasped. "All except the driver," one whispered. "He's gone." Elise swallowed hard, pushing down the ache in her chest. "Then we keep moving, north. The border's only 5 kilometers. They moved again, slower, quieter, hearts pounding. Behind them, the flames of the burning cart lit the night like a warning to all who dared defy the Reich. But Elise didn't look back. She never did. Hours later, just as dawn broke, the forest opened onto a narrow road lined with poplars. Beyond it, a low wire fence marked the edge of occupied territory. Elise stopped, her breath catching. "There," she whispered. "That's the border." The men stared, disbelief etched on their faces. "We made it?" She nodded, a faint, weary smile on her lips. They crossed together, one by one into the misty fields beyond. On the other side, a group of uniformed men emerged from the trees, their flags unfamiliar, the Allied crest gleaming in the morning light. When they saw Elise and her companions, they lowered their weapons. "You're safe now," one said. "Welcome to freedom."
Elise looked back at the forest, at the shadows she had walked through, the lives she had risked everything for. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "No, freedom was never mine. It belonged to them." And as the sun broke through the clouds, she let herself smile, not in triumph, but in peace. For the first time in years, she had nothing left to fear. Yet Elise herself remained humble. She did not seek fame. She did not ask for medals. She had done what she had to do. The war had taken much, but it had also left something behind. The certainty that even in the darkest times, a single person's choices could shine like a beacon. In her later years, she lived quietly in a small village near the coast, her hands tending a modest garden, her eyes often looking toward the horizon. Occasionally, veterans would come to her door, older now, scarred and changed, and thank her for saving them, for giving them a second chance at life. Elise would smile,
sometimes nod, and sometimes simply say, "I only did what anyone should have." But history, as it often does, forgot her. The books of war mentioned great generals, famous battles, strategic victories. They rarely told the stories of shadows, of quiet defiance, of those who saved lives from the margins. Yet the memory lived on, in letters, in whispered stories, in the lives she had touched. And for every soldier who escaped, every child hidden from harm, Elise Dubois was there, a silent guardian who had risked everything behind enemy mines. Her story is a testament that courage does not always roar, that heroism does not always wear a uniform, and that mercy can be the most powerful weapon of all. And though her name may be forgotten by many, the world she saved remembers her in the hearts of those who lived. Elise, the nurse, the shadow angel, the woman who walked through fire to carry others to safety. Her legend endured, not in monuments, but in the lives she gave back to the world.
Yet Elise herself remained humble. She did not seek fame. She did not ask for medals. She had done what she had to do. The war had taken much, but it had also left something behind. The certainty that even in the darkest times, a single person's choices could shine like a beacon. In her later years, she lived quietly in a small village near the coast, her hands tending a modest garden, her eyes often looking toward the horizon. Occasionally, veterans would come to her door, older now, scarred and changed, and thank her for saving them, for giving them a second chance at life. Elise would smile, sometimes nod, and sometimes simply say, "I only did what anyone should have." But history, as it often does, forgot her. The books of war mentioned great generals, famous battles, strategic victories. They rarely told the stories of shadows, of quiet defiance, of those who saved lives from the margins. Yet the memory lived on in letters, in whispered stories, in the lives she had touched. And for every soldier who escaped, every child hidden from harm, Elise Dubois was there, a silent guardian who had risked everything behind enemy lines. Her story is a testament that courage does not always roar, that heroism does not always wear a uniform, and that mercy can be the most powerful weapon of all. And though her name may be forgotten by many, the world she saved remembers her in the hearts of those who lived. Elise, the nurse, the shadow angel, the woman who walked through fire to carry others to safety. Her legend endured, not in monuments, but in the lives she gave back to the world.